It's really good to take time out to consider what it is that you're here for, why you do, what it is you want to do, what it is you want to be known for, what your legacy should be, what it is that inspires you, and what the purpose of life is all about. I have been working with ultra wealthy people for a very long time, helping them to understand their own purpose. What is the value of the wealth that they've created? I was advising UBS, one of the largest private banks in the world, over 20 years ago. One of the things I pointed out to them then, and it's even more true today, is this. It's all very well being a wealth manager, a fund manager. It's okay to be someone whose job it is to increase the wealth of people who are already very wealthy, but you're not actually solving a problem. You think you're serving your client, but in fact you may well be making their own personal problem worse. Why is that? Well, you see, if someone has already a net worth of over, say, 100 million euros or 200 million euros or even €1 billion, and as a result of your great ingenuity and genius, you manage to increase their net worth by, let's say, 10% over the next year, so what? The fact is, they can't even spend the wealth that they've got. In fact, the truth is that if you look at the kind of things that people do who are very wealthy, almost all of them are guaranteed to make them even more money. So they spend money on art. The art increases in value. They go and buy property. The property hopefully increases in value. They invest in businesses, and the businesses make profit and increase in value. And so it goes on. It can't be enjoyed in your lifetime, not that kind of wealth. Actually, even worse, it's toxic. Yes, that's true. You see, the majority of ultra-high net worth people I talk to tell me a different story, which is that the wealth which they hoped would create a better future for their family is in danger of destroying the very people that they love the most. So you have a high net worth person who says, look, I've already given 100,000 each to my 3 children. I'm not sure it did them any good. I gave another one 2 million to start a business. But they're saying, the trouble is, my children have never known what it is to be hungry, not like me. They never had to fight for their first job, not like me. They never had to work their way up to take huge risks with everything that they had when they were really hungry, and wondering and lying awake at night worrying about their future and if they would survive or go bust. Indeed, they went to such incredible schools that they were exposed to all kinds of others who'd also been spoiled by wealth, but not in the same place that their parents were at the same stage of life. And that's for the grandchildren. Well, so you have ultra-high net worth individuals saying, well, my children have had more than enough. I put some in trust for the grandchildren. And the rest? Well, they've only now accounted for 10 million. They've got another 290 million. So what happens to that? And you can't take it with you into the next life. So we have a problem. As surveys show, once someone has got an income of around $100,000 a year, actually you can increase that income by $1 million or 2 or 3 or 4, but there's no real evidence that the happiness, the satisfaction or personal fulfillment of the individual will increase. In fact, it's often the opposite. So what's it all for? So many entrepreneurs started with nothing. In fact, not only started with nothing, but often have a history of pain in their families. As so many prominent entrepreneurs were hungry as children. I don't mean necessarily literally hungry, but there were pressures. Often there's an absent father, an early parental death. Often you'll find that an entrepreneur was the oldest child, had to struggle to get out of school, to get a job early so that the family could survive. Entrepreneurs often have a story which is beyond innovation. Entrepreneurs often say they started with the aim of providing for their family so their own family would never experience the kind of financial insecurity that they themselves had when they were children. If the wealth is in danger of damaging the people it was supposed to improve the lives of and can't be taken with you into the next life, then we have to find a different purpose for it. There is only one purpose that works, and that is to give it away. Yes. You see, these people I'm talking about have created wealth out of business, not giving away, by charging a lot, by saying, here's a service, here's a product, you pay me more than it costs me, the rest is profit, and I take it into my bank account. But actually, the only way you can redeem the value of that, since you can't enjoy it, you can't enjoy spending 290 million on yourself. There's only a limited number of meals you can eat, or journeys you can take, or experiences you can have. If you can't take it with you, you have to give it away. That is the purpose. And that is why I said to UBS, that was my client over 20 years ago, when I was talking to the head of private banking, when I was talking to their senior team, and I said, philanthropic advice will be #1 issue for private bankers looking to really satisfy the deepest needs of their ultra-high net worth banking clients. This is far more than wealth management. Wealth management just compounds the problem. It just makes them wealthier. It just increases the size of the challenge. It's either going to be disposed of by me, or someone else after I'm dead and gone is going to be disposing of my wealth for me, either because I've given it away to children who quite frankly will be spoilt to death by it, or to my grandchildren, or because I've put it in trust and some trustees of my foundation after my death are busy spending it for me. Well, actually far better for me to spend it myself on things that I believe in, things that I'm passionate about. Welcome to Philanthropy. Welcome to Philanthropic Advisory Services for ultra-high net worth individuals. Most big entrepreneurs have no idea how to do this well. They are obsessed with efficiency, productivity, value for money, accountability, and so on, because these are the skills that have created wealth in the first place. But when it comes to using those same skills in philanthropy, there's a big problem. The philanthropy is not about a product or a service. It's about a passion and a purpose. It's about doing something extraordinary and doing it well, doing it efficiently. And the trouble is that the people who are most passionate about changing our world are often people who lack basic business skills, they're inefficient, they're do-gooders, they may be doing things in a voluntary way, so it's difficult to criticize them for wasting money because they're giving so much of their own time, of zeal and energy and commitment to change the world. But when you put the world of the entrepreneur who has done it, who's made $1 billion, with the world of the do-gooder who has had an extraordinary experience and wants to change the whole of the future, then you often get a culture clash. When you apply those kinds of disciplines into the philanthropic world, you can land up destroying the very passion that we started with. It's all about helping to identify the passion of the wealthy individual and to channel that into practical results. It's usually a story. It's a mother with Alzheimer's, a son with a very rare genetic condition. You can have primary calling, which is where the individual themselves has had this apocalyptic, life-changing, revelatory experience. Or you can have a secondary calling, which is where the individual has connected with the passion and fire of another person who had that primary experience. In my own case, my wife and I started an AIDS foundation 30 years ago. It happened out of my own work as a cancer doctor, looking after people dying of cancer at home. I never imagined I'd land up working with HIV, but people with HIV were in need. of the same kind of care at home services as they were dying. So I was asked to get involved, and when I did, I was really shocked by the needs of people with HIV. And then I discovered outside of my city of London the gigantic Holocaust across the world, especially in places like Uganda, where when I first visited in 1988, I discovered that around a third of all younger people were already infected in many towns and cities with HIV. But you know what? That's just statistics. If you want to know the passion comes from a story. And the story is me when I'm just a young doctor, 30 years old, walking onto an AIDS ward for the first time in London, and I have a traumatic experience, one of the worst days of my entire life, and the image of that lives with me today. A young man who I saw suffocating to death in the side room of a London teaching hospital on his own, with no doctor, no nurse, no social worker, and no family present. It was like 30 years of hospice medicine had stood still. He didn't want his parents to know he had HIV because it would mean that they would know that he was gay. I couldn't get my own home care team involved with people with HIV. When I came back, they said, hope you haven't come back with a patient, because you'll be doing 24-hour on call 365 days a week, Patrick, on your own, mate, because we are not going to help people with AIDS. It was a bit like Ebola was 30 years later. I had some fears myself, I confess to you. We can understand the stigma. I confess to you, I wasn't particularly wanting to get involved with HIV. I didn't feel any great sympathy or engagement with people with HIV. And as someone of faith, as a Christian, I was convicted of my appalling attitudes. Here was a human being made in the image of God. How could I possibly turn away just because I had views about how they might or might not have become infected? And so I became involved, doing what I could to get people home with HIV and to give them compassionate, practical care. We started training volunteers to do what doctors and nurses would not. And so ASSET was born, AIDS care, education and training. We were very quickly in Uganda, in Thailand, across the UK, in Romania. And today, 30 years later, we're in 15 countries. Why do I tell this story? Because philanthropy is more than about an idea. It's about a vision of a better future, but it's almost always triggered by a personal story. When I'm helping ultra-high net worth people to find their passion, I guess that's where I start. I start with their own story, their own life story, things that have really struck them, to try to connect with what their own deep and raw passions are really about. Someone might say, well, quite frankly, Patrick, I've spent so much time earning money and doing genius things in business, I haven't had time to develop my own story. So I say, well, okay, well, why don't you connect with someone else's then? Let's go on the journey. I've taken people to all kinds of places in the world. I took one particular very wealthy entrepreneur to Africa. I took him first to Zimbabwe, South Africa, then Uganda. Say, okay, don't connect with my story, but let me take you on a journey and see if you'll discover yours. Now, it won't be your life story probably, but it may be part of your story. And let's have a look and see how the world is made. And that individual, when he did the first trip, he said, look, I needed this. This has really grounded me. This has kind of put me in touch with the core of my being. It's incredibly important, you know, to be able to go into a mud hut, to see how people of a completely different world are living and be exposed to the gigantic needs in the world. And here am I, you know, an individual with a wealth that's almost impossible for any of these people to imagine. Can I go back again? So we went back again, and same thing. And then the question is, so how do you organise it? And again, this is a key for philanthropic advisory services in private banking, because they could just say, okay, every few months I write another big check, it goes to a big foundation, They make the thing happen. But any wealth advisor is likely to say, that's a bit haphazard. What we need to be doing is systematically moving your wealth in tax-efficient ways into some kind of a vehicle. Let's call it a charitable foundation. It's your own family trust. And you can put whatever advisors you want onto it, but it's your decision about how that money is used. And it sits there and can be called off when you want it, in whatever amounts you want it. It's sitting there as a reserve, already set aside, and what's more, invested well. So now the private banker, instead of having a job which is to create more wealth for the individual, which just creates an additional problem for them, the private banker is now increasing the wealth for the person's own family foundation, so that any money that has not yet been spent on charitable work will go on multiplying until decision is made about how it's used. And this kind of thing is electrifying. And what is more, it's not just about the individual, it's redemptive for their families. In fact, the individual that we went with to South Africa, Zimbabwe, Uganda, we went with another member of the family each time, and the reason why it's redemptive, especially with children, is because it helps the children to see what it's about. So, I don't know, when some daughter says, oh, I want trainers with diamond encrusted buttons or something. Say, okay, well, let's think about Uganda. Or when the son says, I need $1 million to start my business. You think, well, okay, let's think about the startup groups where actually the average size of loan to start a new business to lift people out of absolute poverty in Congo was $15. So you tell me why your project is 1 million times worthier than an income generating project for an individual in Congo, and I will give you $15 million. $15 million. But if you can't, I'm going to make a donation of $15 million to expand these income generating projects so that 1 million people can have a chance to do something with their lives. Wow, these things are sobering. Now we begin to understand why Dad worked so hard. We begin to understand why family holiday got interrupted again. Why? So Dad can make another 100 million? No. It's so we as a family might be able to give away another $100 million. That would be enough to provide school fees for, 1 million children for a year. Amazing. Now we are in completely different territory regarding purpose and meaning, and it brings the spirit alive. Now there's another dimension too. You see, when employees understand that the wealth they create, or a very significant part of it, is going to be donated, of course they're getting their salaries, their bonuses, their pension schemes, whatever, but what's left over is not going to some big wealthy individual who's just going to squander it all, but most of it's been given away. This is electrifying to the employees. So we get a virtual circle. So we now get purpose into the business. So the AIDS charity that we started in 1988, we started with nothing. We started with just a few pieces of paper and a phone number and 50 volunteers. But we were funded substantially so that we could go national and then global by a charity that made all its money from selling houses. Yes, this is an estate agent, and all the shares of this estate agency, with its many offices around the UK, were given away many years previously by the owner to his own charity, and his own charity was named after his dear wife who died, called Phyllis, so it was called the Phyllis Trust. It was then called World in Need, and World in Need's only income was from 100% of the profits from Andrew's estate agents in London. And with this, the aim of the foundation was to start new charities. They weren't allowed to give any money to existing work. only to spawn new ones, because this guy was an entrepreneur and he wanted to see philanthropic entrepreneurs. He wanted to back the best of the best, people who are visionary, enthusiastic, energetic, sacrificial in what they're doing, and giving up their own lives to make something amazing happen. And he would back them with finance, but also with expertise, a bit like private equity. But this is in philanthropy. So we acquired board members, a British ambassador, the head of a FTSE 100 company. Very, very experienced people came in alongside me as an entrepreneur to turn my vision into something that became a global reality 30 years later. What an extraordinary thing. Now, what was the impact on Andrews? Well, huge. See, Andrews estate agency prides itself every year in its own story. Its story is of seeding philanthropic initiatives all over the world. So that adds a very special dimension to staff, to those who are being asked to work an extra hour or a day, or to cover someone's absence, or to do something extraordinary, well above the call of duty, but just because they think it's worthwhile, because it could just make some extra profit, and you know where that profit's going. 100% of it will be given away. It will change the lives of orphans in Africa. It will help the environment by helping to save rainforests in Brazil, whatever it is. So what a virtuous circle. So we started off with an ultra high net worth individual, advising them on wealth. We've helped them to capture their passion. We've set up a family foundation. We've actually now possibly put quite a few of the shares that they own, a great chunk of equity, into the foundation. So it's not just finance, but it's actual assets. And now we're using that not only to provide extra purpose for the next generation and the one below for the entrepreneur, but also to instill enthusiasm, energy, resourcefulness, conviction, loyalty, and the rest in the employees of the company. This is the future, philanthropic advisory services. I often say this: if you could capture even 1%, 2% of the raw energy you see in many NGOs, non-government organizations, in charities, and bring it into business, you see a dramatic impact, and you've just seen how to do that.